coming on the air with the key moments and the new reaction to something we have never seen before. A former president under arrest, with Donald Trump pleading not guilty here in Manhattan today to nearly 36 fraud charges. We are live from New York to Florida with what happens next, what this means for him, not just legally but politically, and what we could hear from him just a few hours from now when he lands back in South Florida. We'll also take you live to Arkansas, and one of the cities already getting ready right now for more storms, even as the recovery is just starting from the last round of tornadoes. Millions of people getting ready for a potentially very dangerous night ahead. Plus, some breaking news out of Nashville with police unsealing a search warrant showing they now have a suicide note, weapons, ammunition from the home of the person who shot and killed 6 people at an elementary school. What these new details are telling us in the search for a motive. And one of the country's top executives says this banking crisis, all this financial drama, it's not over yet, and we're going to be feeling it for a long time to come. We'll talk about if these threats to the financial sector could be a threat to your budget, too. And then there's this question of whether the First Lady may have committed a bit of a technical foul with an invite to the winner and loser of this year's Women's Basketball Championship, why the White House is now walking back that line, and what LSU's star thinks of it all later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and right now, Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, is in the air in his plane, taking off from here in New York in just the last hour on his way back to Florida after showing up in that courtroom and pleading not guilty to 34 felony charges. If a picture says 1,000 words, these photos tell the story of this moment in history. Donald Trump in court, speaking the words not guilty himself before turning it over to the lawyer you see on his right. You just saw him there, Todd Blanche, who spoke on behalf of Mr. Trump. The charges here, 34 counts, centering on payments to former adult film star Stormy Daniels towards the end of his 2016 presidential campaign. Not long after, we heard from the person leading this indictment. You see him here, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. He was asked by our own Garrett Haake if he has new evidence here. Did he decide to charge when his predecessor and federal prosecutors didn't bring him up initially, and why now? Listen.
We have had available to the office additional evidence that was not in the office's possession prior to my time here. The basis for business integrity and a well-functioning business marketplace is true and accurate record keeping. That's the charge that's brought here, falsifying New York State business records.
Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg today. So after days of speculating, right, we can finally walk you through what exactly these charges say. We didn't know until literally about 2.5 hours ago. Specifically, what will Mr. Trump face whenever this trial happens, because that's a question mark here. You see it right here, 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree, Class E felony. There is not a conspiracy charge here. That is interesting. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. It's not clear what crime the DA is using to elevate these counts to felonies. He's talking about a New York state law, a federal law as well. But the indictment, the statement of facts, talks about this bigger scheme to try to hide things from the public about Mr. Trump's alleged affair with Stormy Daniels ahead of the election, an affair he denies. We also know this was another question. No gag order that's stopping the former president or his attorneys from speaking publicly about the case. In fact, his lawyers did exactly that about 15 minutes after this arraignment ended. They described what's going on in the mind of the former president right now. Listen.
He's frustrated, he's upset, but I'll tell you what, he's motivated, and it's not going to stop him, and it's not going to slow him down.
So that what you just saw, right, is a laying out of the facts as it happened from earlier today up until about an hour ago. If you're wondering what happens next, here we go. Legally, in the next 15 days, prosecutors are going to have to hand over evidence to the Trump legal team. This is called discovery. His lawyers will then have a set period of time to file any motions. After that, mark your calendars, early December. That is when the next hearing will be held in this case. That's like 8 months from today, right in the thick of the Republican primary campaign season. That is the legal breakdown, right? There is also a political breakdown here, too, because Donald Trump will probably make the case tonight. Just about 3.5 hours or so in coverage you will see right here on News Now. Because remember, he's a candidate for president again in 2024. He's one of the few Republicans officially in this race, and a lot of people in his party are already lining up behind him here. The question is, will that last? Republican operatives who I'm talking to say that is part of the question mark here. But right now, in the words of one source, this is nitrous oxide for Donald Trump. Question is, what happens in the long run, right? Do you still see this rallying cry around the former president? Could cracks emerge? Right now, no signs of them. You look at the polls, a majority of Americans approve of this indictment. Again, this was before the specific details came out that these surveys were done. Many think that politics did play some role in it, and this divides largely along party lines. None of it is slowing down what we're hearing, even in just the last 30, 40, 50 minutes from Republican officials like lawmakers, other allies of Donald Trump on Capitol Hill. And then we're also hearing from voters who will vote in the primary. Donald Trump is the clear frontrunner. It is not clear whether any charges against him will change that. Let's get to our team covering every angle here from New York to Florida. And I want to start in Lower Manhattan, where all the action was today. Gabe Gutierrez got frankly, pretty close to a front row seat in that courtroom. Gabe, talk us through it.
Hey there, Hallie. Well, first, let me tell you, I can tell you how quickly the NYPD works. Just in the last few moments, they've already taken away these security barricades. The street behind me where the former president went into the courthouse has already been opened up. The security concerns largely dying down here. But let me tell you about what I saw inside that courthouse, Hallie. It was a remarkable hearing, an arraignment unlike any other that I've seen. You mentioned in the introduction that former President Trump said himself the words "not guilty" when he was asked for a plea, and it devolved into opening statements basically for this trial, and that's according to the words of former President Trump's lead defense attorney, whoever even jokingly referred to them as opening statements. The prosecution laid out its case, as you said, 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, but it also brought up a lot of questions about free speech, and the prosecution citing several instances of the former president attacking the district attorney verbally on social media and asking the judge for a restrictive protective order to prevent the former president from posting potentially some of the discovery, some of the evidence in this case on social media, instead of using it to mount a defense in a courtroom, using it potentially to mount his defense in the court of public opinion. The judge significantly came back and said that he would not impose a gag order, that he wouldn't do so even if it was asked, but he did make a request of the former president to quit using any language that could potentially incite violence. So this will play out, as you said,
his lawyers would push back on that,
months,
Gabe.
some back and forths.
I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but I want to bring up this point, because if people were watching live coverage, they probably saw Donald Trump's attorneys pounce on sort of the line you just said, saying, well, the judge warned everybody in this case not to try to incite violence here.
That is correct that the judge said that, but he directly spoke to the defense as well. I wouldn't use the word admonishing, Hallie, but he certainly was firm. He made a request, not an order, but he did say if in the future, if the former president continues to use some of that charged rhetoric, which is what a word the judge used, a description the judge used, that he might be able to reconsider this. But the judge was very measured. He was really trying to weigh the free speech and the First Amendment rights of a presidential candidate with the need for the judicial system to move forward unimpeded. Yeah. And so it was an incredible, again, this is an argument that you wouldn't normally hear in an arraignment, but that's exactly what unfolded. And another thing, Hallie, briefly, I was surprised to hear the prosecution say that it wanted a trial date of January 2024. As you said, right smack in the middle of a heated presidential campaign. The defense came back and said, we don't think that's realistic, perhaps maybe the spring of next year. The next potential court appearance for the former president now scheduled for early December, as you said, Hallie.
You know, Gabe, I bring up some of this stuff because, and let's be clear, there is only one person, right, one individual in that courtroom who had walked close to the line and in the eyes of his critics crossed it when it came to the idea of threats against, let's say, the judge or against the district attorney here. And I was struck by something that you said in some of our coverage, and if viewers haven't seen it, I want to tell them hours ago, which was, Gabe, you do arraignments in this courthouse all the time, around the country all the time. You are somebody who has been out there. You understand this process. This was extraordinary on so many levels, not just because of the way that it's making history, Gabe, the fact that the defendant is the person we see on screen, the former president, but the length, the security procedures around it, the Secret Service officers, dozens of law enforcement officers in that room as this happened.
Right, Hallie, and it was incredible to walk into that courtroom. We had a metal detector on the first floor, a second metal detector on the 15th 15th floor, a phalanx of Secret Service agents around the former president as he came into that room. There was nothing ordinary about this arraignment. It was incredible to be in that courthouse as it was unfolding. Again, so many weighty legal, political, campaign issues, and just so many issues discussed in what is normally a simple arraignment. And then again, once again, we were speculating whether the former president would use his own words, would speak himself, plead not guilty. He made sure to do that very firmly, Howard.
Gabe Gutierrez live for us there, starting us off tonight in Lower Manhattan. Gabe, thank you very much. Let me bring in now Laura Jarrett, our senior legal correspondent. Let's get to it, Laura, okay? Because this has been, I mean, how many days have we sat and talked about what could come in this indictment? Now we know. Let me see if I understand it. I'm going to try to put it in as plain English as possible. Because I think people are wondering, what's the upshot? What do they need to know? That Donald Trump has been charged with 34 felonies related to a New York state law and a federal campaign statute. Conspiracy is not one of them, and it all stems from these alleged hush money payments to former adult film star Stormy Daniels, even though Karen McDougal and some other issues were also brought up in the statement of facts. Does that encapsulate it? Is that what we know?
It does. The only wrinkle I would add to that, a footnote, if you will, the federal campaign issue.
Yeah, explain that.
It's not charged, and so it may be a part of the case. It's certainly...
And it just he brings it up. Alvin Bragg brings it up when he's talking about this case.
He brings it up because he needs a hook for the second crime, right? So the intent to defraud, the statute that is part of this, that's making up the actual indictment, the falsification of business records, you need to have an intent to commit or conceal a second crime to cover up the falsification of business records. And they're saying that the second crime, as they lay out in the statement of facts, not in the indictment, couple different things. State conspiracy statute, potentially, federal election issues concerning how many donations are made to benefit Trump's campaign. Tax issues he lays out. None of this is in the actual indictment. And so it's interesting to watch what he's done here, sort of put forth a robust story in the statement of facts and not in the actual indictment.
So then the bottom line is, and I know that as a sort of correspondent and not an analyst or former attorney yourself, at least as it relates to this kind of thing, the question comes up, and it's already come up from some allies of Donald Trump. Is this a good case? They would argue the answer is no, right? As far as sort of its legal flimsiness in their eyes, right, in these Republicans' eyes. You have made the point. There's a lot of evidence here. There's a lot of documents. They got the receipt, right?
Yeah.
The papers are in here. But there is a question of how far this case could go.
Yeah, and I think that you're going to hear the word untested, novel, perhaps. It's not that it's weak on the documents. They have plenty of receipts to back up the fact that these payments were made. I don't even think Trump's own attorneys would deny that the payments were made. They're just going to say the whole thing's not illegal. And that's where a judge is going to have to decide. Before this ever gets to a jury, before this ever gets to a trial, a judge is going to have to decide whether what the prosecution has alleged here actually violated the law. And it's just not so clear on that point.
The case that Alvin Bragg is making is essentially, and I want to, again, I'm going to put it like a layperson was, because you know that's what I am. I do the politics, not the legal, which is, they say Donald Trump lied about a bunch of stuff illegally to help his 2016 campaign.
Yes,
that's the crux.
That's the crux of it. That's the entire story, is that he falsified these payments in order to execute a fraud on the American public. Because if the American public had known about these affairs, had known that this, was happening, maybe they would have voted differently. That's their entire theory of the case, is that they did this in order to make sure this stuff didn't come out before the election.
Can I ask you one more question that's been on my mind here? And this is dipping a bit into the weeds. Bear with me. There's a reason we're getting into this. This relates again to Stormy Daniels. Okay, she is the former adult film star who has, I think, been in the news quite a bit over the course of the last 7 years or so. I think people would be familiar with her. Another woman's name was brought up in the statement of facts. Not her name, but
it's clear who it is.
Facts of the case that make it clear that it is Karen McDougal, this former Playboy model who says she also got a hush money payout. Yeah. Why does Alvin Bragg bring that into the equation? Why does the Manhattan DA's office bring that into the equation if they're only charging as it relates to the Stormy piece?
Yeah, and that's where you get into this territory of sort of using uncharged conduct to show a pattern or a course of conduct. And none of this may reach a jury. I should mention, this was only the material that was used in order to get a grand jury to return an indictment. They need probable cause for a crime that's been committed. This may not reach the jury. And so the whole idea of a second payment, even a payment to a doorman, we now have laid out here, that's just to show the person's MO. This is how he does things. This is what he was doing in order to cover up things before the election. But none of this may actually reach a jury.
Laura Jarrett, we are lucky to have you on board here at NBC. Go get ready for Nightly News. I know you have to. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll talk again through the course of the night. That is because we will be back together through the course of this night with NBC News' coverage here on NBC News Now of Donald Trump's primetime speech that he is set to give when his plane that is currently in the air, probably somewhere over D.C. by now, maybe further south, heading back to his Mar-a-Lago home. That is where we find our Vaughn Hilliard, who has been the tip of the reporting spear for us as it relates to Donald Trump and his campaign. We've talked about the sort of nuts and bolts in New York, Vaughn. We've talked about the legal piece of it. Let's talk about the politics piece of it. Donald Trump doesn't like this. His own attorneys made that clear, that he was frustrated and upset. While he is flying back to Mar-a-Lago, he is fundraising actively off of this, sending out a fundraising email, insisting that, in the words of his campaign, signed by Donald Trump, that he is in great spirits because of the enormous amounts of money that his campaign has brought in since news of this indictment broke. What is the more than $10 million, by the way? What's the expectation for tonight?
Right, at 8:15 p.m. Eastern time, he's going to take this stage here with Mar-a-Lago as his backdrop. It's the same place he announced his presidential bid just a few months ago. For Donald Trump, I think it's important to note, Hallie, that his attorneys, they sent a letter to the judge requesting that cameras not be allowed inside of the courtroom today and as part of this trial ahead here. It's notable because in the court of law, Donald Trump, unless he takes a witness stand, will only have so much ability to shape what is said inside of there. And the place that he does have the microphone is at campaign events, and that is why here tonight in prime time he is going to be taking the microphone. Of course, you know, for Donald Trump here, it's also about applying the pressure on the likes of Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, potential Republican rivals who have largely echoed him over the years about the idea that Donald Trump has been wrongly investigated and in an effort to try to prosecute him. Well, the moment has come, and the moment is here in the heart of a presidential campaign in which Donald Trump is anywhere from 20 to 30 percentage points up in national Republican primary polls. It was just last week, a Quinnipiac poll that came out that showed among Republican voters nationally that 75% of them said if Donald Trump were to be criminally charged, they didn't believe that it should be disqualifying for him to be president. So for Donald Trump, it is about coming up here and undercutting the investigation and now the prosecution of him, because his presidential campaign is now going to be running in parallel to a criminal trial.
That's exactly right, especially when you look at a potential criminal trial, when you look at the timing of how some of these next motions, hearings, court dates are going to go down. As we said, early December, the next one. There's another piece that's important here, Vaughn, and you're catching me look at my computer because we are hearing from some of the former president's allies on Capitol Hill, specifically the most powerful Republican in the House of Representatives, and that's Speaker Kevin McCarthy. In a statement just into us, a tweet, actually, I should say, that he has just put out, the Speaker says that the DA in Manhattan is attempting to interfere in our democratic process by invoking federal law to bring what he describes as politicized charges against Donald Trump. And then he goes on to say that Bragg will be held accountable by Congress. This is two things going on here, Vaughn. Number one, we have seen lawmakers on the Republican side of the aisle rally around Donald Trump here. Several of them will be where you are tonight. Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example. I think Matt Gaetz may be there. We saw George Santos in Lower Manhattan today saying that he wanted Donald Trump to stay strong. The other piece of this is what's going to happen on the Hill. We have already seen some back and forth between House Republicans and the Manhattan District Attorney. These House Republicans want to haul in Alvin Bragg and his team to get him to answer questions about what they see as a political prosecution here.
Right. In Alvin Bragg's office, they sent a letter back to top House Republicans admonishing them for being complicit and being a part of Donald Trump's effort to undermine what was their investigation, then their indictment, without having even seen the criminal charges at that point. Now that is in front of them here. And you're dealing with the reality, too, that it's not just them, to be fair. Mitt Romney putting out a statement here in just the last 20 minutes in which he said, quote, I believe President Trump's character and conduct make him unfit for office. Even so, I believe the New York prosecutor has stretched to reach felony criminal charges in order to fit a political agenda. Romney, though, goes on to note the reality is that this is not going to be voters that ultimately decide whether Donald Trump is guilty or not. It is going to be a jury of his peers in New York City who ultimately hear this case and determine its merits. The question here is, though, even if he were to be found guilty, it is going to be up to Donald Trump to go around the country and sell that he should be the next president of the United States.
Vaughn, we're just showing a live shot of what it looks like in West Palm Beach and Palm Beach where you are. Give us a sense of the vibe there. It seems like there are people, and we know there are a handful of folks who tend to come out during these kinds of events when Donald Trump is in the news, when there are moments like this. Who have you seen, and who do you expect to be in the ballroom where you are tonight?
It's a good question. There's a sturdy base of allies that are consistently in here. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I know, will be here after being down or being up in New York here earlier today. But this is a conversation across the country. And, I was even Uber ride this weekend, Hallie, and one woman told me that she voted for Donald Trump in 2016, voted for Joe Biden in 2020. She now wishes she had voted for Donald Trump and feels like this is a political effort to take him down. This is complex. It's layered in ways that I don't think, will vary from community to community. And Hallie, I think these are conversations that Americans are going to be having over the months ahead as this potential criminal trial goes on.
Vaughn Hilliard live for us there in Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll talk to Vaughn, we'll talk to Gabe and Laura and the rest of the team throughout the night here on NBC News Now with more coverage of this historic day in American politics. Former President Donald Trump officially arraigned now in a Manhattan court on criminal charges. More coverage of that, like I said, but believe it or not, there is also other news and plenty of it that has happened over the course of the day, including something extremely serious for millions of people in this country. 43 million people, you see them there, under the threat of this severe weather stretching from the Great Lakes down to northern Texas. You're looking at the possibility of very bad winds, the risk of more tornadoes to an area that, if you can believe it, just got devastated, just annihilated by tornadoes a matter of days ago. The maps look virtually the same, and these were deadly storms. You see the destruction on screen. 32 people lost their lives in these storms. So right now, tonight, as we look ahead as to what's going to happen over the course of the next few hours, it's starting to pick up in Illinois. Look at this. There's big hail falling down there in Oswego. There's also storm damage already being reported in some other locations as well. As you take a look at just, that's like fist-size hail, maybe just a bit smaller than that. The timing here is important because tornadoes, as we talk about a lot here on the show, they can be more dangerous at night. The worst of it for Des Moines, for Chicago, is going to start in the next hour or so. St. Louis, we're looking at you late tonight into the morning. And then Little Rock tomorrow morning, the worst of it, 5 a.m. Central Time tomorrow. We'll get to meteorologist Angie Lastman in just a minute, but I want to get to Morgan Chesky, who is on the ground in Little Rock, Arkansas. And that is a dateline, Morgan, that we were just talking about 3-4 days ago that got, as we can see behind you, just impacted so badly by the tornadoes that came through. And now there's a risk for more. What are you hearing from folks?
Hallie, a lot of frustration. This is what's left after one of two EF3 tornadoes struck Arkansas less than 1 week ago. One death here in Little Rock, 4 others in the Arkansas town of Wynne. And it is inconceivable for a lot of these folks, even though they know this is tornado season, that there could be another round coming through tonight. And the scariest part about all this, Hallie, is the fact that that is when the worst of this storm system is expected to hit the Arkansas area. We know tornadoes twice as deadly once the sun goes down here. We are expecting some sporadic rain and potential hail as it gets later in the day. But right now, the word from FEMA to everyone in this storm-stricken area has been make sure you have your cell phones charged, have that emergency kit ready, even though you probably had to use it less than a week ago for the last storm system. So incredibly tough to see what this community is dealing with right now. We do know that several area shelters are open in this area, Hallie, and they will definitely be put to use because we know there are still thousands without power. As fast as these power crews have been out and about trying to restore electricity, they are having to compete with the elements. That effort, no doubt, going to be hampered by this system coming through later tonight.
Is anybody back in their homes, Morgan? I wonder. Have people tried to come back only to have to potentially evacuate again?
We know that people have been allowed to go back to their homes that had to evacuate earlier, but for a lot of these homes that had significant structural damage, they are still staying with friends, family, or in these shelters because the damage is just far too extensive. Hallie.
Morgan Chesky live for us there in Little Rock. Morgan, thank you for being there for us tonight. I want to bring in meteorologist Angie Lastman. We laid out some of what the track is over the course of the next 8-10 hours or so. Talk through where the risk is right now.
Yeah, the risk is just getting started. That's a key point, Hallie, here. And we're going to see this system continuing to move to the east. And that means that a large swath of people starting right now through even tomorrow afternoon and into the evening hours are going to see the potential for some really strong storms. Where you see the orange, where you see the red, that's where we have the greatest risk for tornadoes. And we're talking long track tornadoes. You heard Morgan and Hallie. Of course, you mentioned the nocturnal tornadoes are the deadliest. And that's something that we'll see lasting into the overnight hours. If you live in Dallas, you could see a line of thunderstorms coming through at 3 a.m. A lot of people are sleeping. Make sure you have a way to get those alerts on your phone. You can, of course, set that up whether you have an Android or an iPhone. And these are some of the areas that we're talking. St. Louis, looking up into parts of Illinois and stretching all the way down into northern Texas. I really want you to be aware, starting from now through the rest of our commute into the overnight hours and even into tomorrow morning. Places like Michigan could see that early morning commute come with the threat of some hail and some strong winds, as well as some tornadoes. That's going to be something we'll watch into tomorrow late in the day, Hallie.
Angie Lassman, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. That weather is affecting a lot of things today, including a key election in Wisconsin for state Supreme Court there, where officials are telling voters, hey, go get your ballots in early before the weather gets to be too bad. Polls there are going to close in just a few hours in what is being called the most important election of the year, 2023, of course, because of the ripple effect that this election could have in other states around the country if the vote goes the liberal candidate's way. It means the court would flip to the left for the first time in 15 years. The race is already making history, the most expensive state Supreme Court election race ever. Look at this, nearly $30 million spent on ads between the two candidates. Now, listen, I get it. If you don't live in Wisconsin, you're like, why should I care, right? This doesn't affect me. I don't live there. Well, look at the series of things that this court could take up. Politicians and local officials from other states will be watching closely, from abortion to redistricting and more. I want to bring in NBC's Shaq Brewster, who is joining us now. Talk through, Shaq, not just why this is so important, but the message here from the race itself and what you've seen as it relates to turnout on the ground so far.
Yeah, Hallie, many political observers feel that this could redefine how we view these nonpartisan judicial races. I mean, it's nonpartisan, but if you look at the candidates and who's backing them, it's very clear what side of the aisle, what side of the ideology they fall on. And, you know, that's something that is relatively new in this race. And in this race, you have Janet Protasiewicz, the liberal judge, self-described liberal judge, who says that abortion is a personal value for her, who has talked about the Wisconsin maps and said that redistricting, they're not fair here in the state of Wisconsin. And her conservative opponent has said justices shouldn't do that. And really, we're going to see which argument wins out. I want you to listen to what we heard from both of the candidates as they went to cast their ballot earlier today on this exact issue.
The just dramatically different nature of what I intend to do on the Supreme Court as a jurist and what my opponent plans to do if she gets there as a politician.
I think it's really going to tell people a lot moving forward. You know, what people think about some of these issues, what people think about somebody running for a nonpartisan office that actually talks about their values.
Now, you ask about turnout. We heard from the Wisconsin Elections Commission earlier today that in terms of the absentee ballots, so all the votes that were cast before people even went into the voting booth today, you had a relatively higher amount for an election like this. It's a spring election and an odd number year. But, of course, it will come down to what we see on Election Day, especially considering the weather that we've been dealing with here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, no kidding. Shaq Brewster, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let's take it to Nashville now, where we're hearing today from some of the first officers to respond to that deadly school shooting, that horrific attack at the Covenant School last week. Listen.
Not knowing what I was walking into, I went through that door with purpose. I knew the gravity of the situation.
It's coming as we're learning some new details about what officials found at the shooter's home when they searched it. The police department, look at this, releasing this list of 47 items. You see it there, 2 shotguns, a suicide note, several journals, weapons, ammunition. Remember, 3 little kids, and 3 school staff members died that day. You see their names and their faces here. I want to bring in Antonia Hilton, who is covering this for us. And what was so, I think, striking to so many people in the aftermath of this awful attack was the way that once this body camera footage had been released last week, we saw these officers charging toward the sound of gunfire. No hesitation. They didn't stop. And now here they are, some of them talking about those awful moments as they had to make their way through that school, knowing that the worst had happened.
Absolutely. That's really struck me as well. And it stands in stark contrast to coverage of Uvalde, right, where it was almost night and day. We knew a lot about the shooter. in the first couple initial days, but months later, that community is still demanding answers about what law enforcement did on the scene that day. That's not the case here.
No.
These officers followed all of the golden rules about how you neutralize a shooter. And I think that today's presser was a really interesting perspective because you got that sense of gravity. They had the opportunity to tell their stories, even share some of their own emotions. Take a listen to some of what they talked about.
That's when I was able to call my wife and tell her I was okay, advise her of everything.
For the situation, I think everyone is doing well. There's obviously been loss of sleep. Children hugged more than normal.
And it's interesting, too, because while there is so much tension and debate over gun reform and what this shooting represents to people in the communities in Tennessee, one thing everyone agrees on is that those officers were heroes that day, that they responded to the shooting, and they likely saved many, many lives.
I want to come back to this idea of this representing a lot to a lot of people in Tennessee, but let me ask you first about sort of the facts of the case, the facts of the investigation that we're getting from police today, this list of things that they found in the shooter's home. How does it help them as they're putting together some of these puzzle pieces around this question of motive?
It really is a puzzle right now because we get new information every day. It's like an onion. And then we also get more questions.
Right.
So what we know right now is that officers executed a search warrant the day of the shooting. They went into the shooter's home and they gathered those 47 items that you mentioned. That includes writings that not just gave them more insight on the shooter's history, life as a student at Covenant themselves, but also their planning for this attack, writing about other school shootings, writing about firearm training. They gathered about 5 yearbooks of their time at Covenant, and they're going to use all of those pieces of physical evidence to get together the story about the motivation. And that is the key thing we're still missing here. We have the physical evidence. We know a lot about how officers responded on the scene, but we still don't totally understand who the shooter really was and why they did this that day.
This shooting has, of course, led to calls for changes to the state's gun laws. We've seen, and we covered it here on the show this week, students leading walkouts, for example, to the state capitol. There's now this situation that is likely to come to a head later on this week where House Republican members at the Tennessee state capitol are trying to expel 3 House Democrats after they led a protest on the House floor last week. Explain that piece of it for us, how this has become such a flashpoint in Tennessee as it is around the country.
It really has. I mean, gun rights and gun reform being at the forefront, but there's also the question of the shooter's identity and the role that might have played in the shooting, and accusations from Republicans who are in an open conflict with their Democratic colleagues right now over how LGBTQ rights also fit into this equation. And so it's like the culture war coalescing around all of these factors in a school shooting, and the emotions in that state. I was just there for a full week. They are so high in any community that you go to. But this vote, I mean, for Democrats there, they say that this represents a complete breakdown of democracy. That's their argument. The Republicans claiming that they were acting inappropriately by protesting alongside their constituents, these 3 Democrats representing some of the more diverse parts of Tennessee. And so, there's talk now about lawsuits and where this may potentially go, but tensions are going to be high in Tennessee for a long time.
Antonia Hilton, thank you for that look, really, and that perspective of what it's like on the ground there. I really appreciate it. We've got a lot more to get to here on the show, including China's new warning to the House Speaker, how his expected meeting with the Taiwanese president, you see her here, could end up being a provocation to Beijing. That's what they say. Plus, the next big live event for Netflix is happening pretty soon. The big reunion you're going to watch as it happens later on in the 5 Things. A new warning from China tonight with a very blunt and very direct message to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy saying, listen, do not meet with the president of Taiwan tomorrow. The Chinese government says Speaker McCarthy should not, in their words, repeat disastrous past mistakes. They've already called any kind of meetup a provocation that could lead to retaliation. Thing is, the meeting between the House Speaker and the Taiwanese president, it is set. It is supposed to happen tomorrow at the Reagan Library in California, and the Taiwanese government is brushing off this new criticism from China. Again, back in August, do you remember this scene? The previous House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, made a surprise visit to Taiwan. China was not happy about it. They were not happy in a big way, responding with live-fire military exercises, unprecedented exercises around the island. This is all a big deal because China claims Taiwan as its own territory and sees any outreach by the United States as an expression of support for Taiwanese independence. I want to bring in Ali Vitale on Capitol Hill. And Ali, we saw this with, I remember covering it with you, with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, then House Speaker at the time, when there was some question of whether she would go to Taiwan. She ultimately did. Yeah. There's this question now with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, obviously different situation and circumstances, given that the meeting would be in the U.S., in California. But help us understand some of the political and geopolitical implications here.
Yeah, look, there was such tension when former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi met with the Taiwanese president in Taiwan. Of course, you're right to point out that this is a different person, a different circumstance, but nevertheless, we're watching the ways that China is responding here to this bipartisan meeting that is set to be tomorrow in California at the Reagan Library. And I say bipartisan in that most of the people who will be in attendance with the speaker will be from the Republican side of the aisle. That being said, a Democrat, Pete Aguilar, will be there representing the Democratic side of this. Hakeem Jeffries, the top Democrat in the minority party, has previously met with the Taiwanese president. He did so last week. So McCarthy there making good on, the other side of the aisle, meeting with her at this pivotal moment. And we're watching what the Taiwanese are saying in response to China's reaction to this meeting, which is, they say in their words from the foreign ministry, even if the authoritarian government continues to expand and increase coercion, talking about China, Taiwan will not back down. So despite the fact that there are warnings about this meeting happening, it's still happening.
The context cannot be ignored here, too, especially on the heels of some of the reporting by our team here at NBC News, Carol Lee, Courtney Kuby, on that spy balloon from China that floated over the United States and what it was able to gather. Some of these tensions as it relates to other key issues, not just Taiwan. There's a lot going on between these two nations.
Yeah, this is far from just about Taiwan, especially when you put it in that larger landscape of one of the few things that Washington can agree on right now in this period of divided government is needing to shine more of a light on China, on the Chinese Communist Party. We've seen select committees here in Congress formed where both parties are marching in lockstep, talking about national security concerns, whether it's on TikTok or with the Chinese spy balloon. There's all of these different pieces of it. And look, it comes as Antony Blinken had previously canceled a trip to meet with the Chinese leaders. And of course, Biden and Xi themselves have not had any calls since the spy balloon incident. It's a tense landscape across the board right now.
Ali Vitale, no joke on that. Ali, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the government has just charged a startup founder with defrauding J.P. Morgan Chase into buying her company. It's an interesting case here with the SEC saying Charlie Javis just made up a list of more than 4 million customers of her college financial planning platform called Frank. She used that allegedly made-up list to convince J.P. Morgan to buy her company for $175 million. Turns out she only had about 300,000 customers. Number 2, the IRS says people in areas that were hit hard by these storms we've been talking about will have a little extra time to file their taxes this year. The new deadline for some is July 31st. That includes parts of Arkansas destroyed by that tornado Friday, along with parts of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, New York, and California. Number 3, ahead of his 25th Masters appearance, Tiger Woods says he doesn't know how many more Masters he has left in him. He's won the tournament 5 times, but says his body is just not the same since that 2021 car crash where he nearly lost a leg. Number 4, here is one for all of you Love is Blind fans. I cannot say that I am among you, but for you, the show's host, Nick Lachey, said this morning on the Today Show that Netflix is bringing back the season 4 cast for a live reunion show on Netflix. It will stream on April 16th. Maybe you'll be watching. Number 5, we're getting another look at the upcoming Barbie movie with a new trailer out today, highly anticipated. This one shows an actual bit of plot, like the fact there's going to be a bunch of different Barbies and Kens. A lot of big stars in that movie, which will be released this summer. If you can't tell, our newsroom is excited about it. When we come back, the head of the biggest bank in the country says his industry is still under threat. Why he's warning that all of this financial drama could have repercussions for years. Stay with us. We are just learning that attorneys for that detained American reporter, Evan Gershkovich, who's been held in Russia, have visited him now in a Russian jail for the first time, according to that paper. The Wall Street Journal's editor-in-chief says, and I'm quoting here, Evan's health is good, and he is grateful for this outpouring of support from around the world. We continue to call for his immediate release. So again, this is from the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, saying that his attorneys were able to meet with him in prison today. We know the White House has called this, his safe return to the United States, a top priority for the president. Listen.
As I said, these charges are ridiculous. Evan is not a spy. Evan has never been a spy. Evan has never worked for the U.S. government, and he is an independent journalist employed by the Wall Street Journal, as you all know. This is a case that is a priority for this president.
Remember, Gershkovich was detained by Russian officials last week on spying allegations that the Journal denies. Let me bring in our foreign correspondent, Matt Bradley, who is joining us now. So, Matt, talk through some of these new details here about how Gershkovich is doing. And frankly, Matt, like, what is the next week? What does the next month look like for him here?
Yeah, I mean, Gershkovich's situation is not looking very good because, remember, as you just described, he is in Russian detention. He's not being accused of what Brittany Griner was being accused of, which was, a very light sort of drug dealing crime. He's being accused of espionage. And the best situation for most accusations in Russian criminal system is that he has less than a 1% chance of being acquitted. The maximum penalty that he could face is 20 years in prison. So his best shot is some sort of prisoner exchange. And that's what we saw when Brittany Griner, the American basketball star, was eventually released. Now we know that, it sounds like his situation, his condition is good, but he's only been in jail for less than a week. So of course his situation is good. He's probably going to be fed. He's probably going to get something like adequate medical care. But in terms of his prospects of being released, the situation is not very strong. And when we think about what the Russian government's motives are here, it looks as though they probably just want to keep him because they want to effectuate some sort of prisoner swap or some sort of concession from the West.
Can we read anything into the fact that at least some of these attorneys have been able to meet with him in that Russian prison?
Not really. Okay. The fact is that the Russian legal system does require that the attorneys will meet with their clients. He does have the right to retain counsel. I mean, this is not a system that is all that different from the West. The fact is, though, while all of the trappings of a Western legal system exist in Russia, it's not actually done that way. So, we've talked to legal analysts, and they say that, yes, you can see on the books that he will have the right to an attorney. All of these things will be there, just like in the Western legal system, but it still doesn't work in the same way that we know. The application of the law isn't going to be applied in the same way that we know it in the West. And that's the real difference. And that is what's going to keep a guy like Gershkovich in jail until there can be some sort of prisoner exchange. Hallie?
Matt Bradley live for us tonight overseas in Kyiv, Ukraine, obviously as the Russian pressure campaign, the Russian invasion there continues. Matt, thanks. Coming up, when a Massachusetts mailman says attacked him, which many had to have his hip replaced. You may not believe it. That's coming up later in the local. A new warning out today from the chairman and CEO of America's biggest bank, Jamie Dimon, saying that, hey, this banking crisis, all this financial drama, it is not over yet, and the repercussions could last for years. This may be setting off some alarm bells for people across the country already dealing with stuff like high inflation and rising gas prices. And when the biggest bank in the country is worried about the economic outlook, you have to think that people listen. Dimon says that the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank last month are still a threat. Remember, SVB collapsed and was shut down by regulators on March 10th. Customers pulled tens of billions of dollars out of the bank. Signature closed just a couple days later. Dimon saying, and I'm quoting here, any crisis that damages Americans' trust in their banks damages all banks. Caleb Silver joins us now. Caleb, how seriously should we be taking this message, this warning from Jamie Dimon?
Well, we haven't heard Jamie Dimon speak on the banking crisis yet, and this came out of their annual report his letter to shareholders, so he was talking about it in the context of that. But when the CEO and chairman of the biggest bank in America, 5th biggest in the world, is saying there will be repercussions and it's not over, we should be listening. That said, he did not say the sky was falling. He was not trying to scare everybody into taking their money out of the bank. On the contrary, he was saying the banking system is resilient and big banks are in much better shape today than they were in 2008.
Does he tend to lean more towards optimism or pessimism when it comes to stuff like, are we going to hit a recession?
Well, he tends to lean towards being balanced because he is the chairman of the biggest bank in America.
You're saying no room for either.
Exactly. So on the one hand, he says, we got to be careful. This isn't over, and there are repercussions. We can talk about the trust issues in banks that people are having right now. But on the other hand, he is the CEO of the bank. He wants people to feel comfortable keeping their money in the bank and not running out.
He did say that this is whatever is going to come ahead as it relates to the economic outlook is not going to look like he thinks what it looked like in 2008 and the sort of crash and the recession that we saw then. What did he say that people like him need to be doing, people like government regulators need to be doing to try to get things to a better feeling place for Americans?
Yeah, he was very careful to say we don't want a knee-jerk reaction to over-regulate the banks right now. And in part, regulation from 2008 may have hurt a lot of these regional banks in terms of the stress test, the amount of reserves they had to have in their banks on their balance sheets. With these rising interest rates, we know that hurt Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic Bank, and many others. Those are the repercussions he's talking about. Rates are higher, and that hurts banks' balance sheets, so you can't weigh banks equally. He doesn't want to overregulate.
So what am I supposed to do about it? And by that, I mean, if I'm sitting at home, I got my checking account in a bank, my savings account in a bank, maybe I have a 401k, maybe not. I should just be kind of hanging out, sitting tight, seeing what's to come?
Yeah, two things you need to do. When he says it could be tempestuous in terms of the economic outlook, know that and make sure your personal finances are set and sound. But also, in terms of banks, make sure the bank you're with is FDIC insured. Make sure you don't have too much money in any one account that isn't insured. Know where you are right now. He's the CEO of the biggest bank in America. Be the CEO of your own life, your own financial life, and that's basically the message from him.
We love to hear a message like that. Caleb Silver. Caleb, thank you very much. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Northeast Bureau, a Massachusetts mailman says he had to have his hip replaced after being attacked by two turkeys. Two aggressive turkeys while on the job. It's not really weird to see turkeys in that part of Massachusetts, but this guy says that the sort of really aggressive behavior, they're coming at you, that's a problem. Doing things like chasing mail carriers around, pecking at their trucks. Right now he's recovering, he's off the job, but says he hopes to be back delivering mail as soon as he can. Out of our Western Bureau, the National Women's Soccer League announcing today that the Bay Area will get its very own team, the league's 14th team, with some big names involved, like former Meta executive Sheryl Sandberg and some former U.S. women's soccer stars. No word yet on the team name or the home stadium, but they will start playing in the 2024 season. And out of our Northeast Bureau, UConn's men's basketball team just got back to campus not too long ago, fresh off their NCAA championship win. They beat out San Diego State, their 5th time winning the whole thing. Here they are, the bus is pulling up. You know that those students are so excited to welcome them back. There's going to be a big parade on Saturday, the governor says, to celebrate. Still to come, speaking of college basketball, why the star of the women's championship team is calling comments from the First Lady a joke and a bit of a pivot from the White House on how to honor the team. That's next. So the White House is kind of backtracking today when it comes to who will get invited to celebrate the NCAA Women's Basketball Championship. You've got today the press secretary for the First Lady, Jill Biden, saying that they're looking forward to celebrating the LSU Tigers on their championship win at the White House, saying her comments in Colorado were intended to applaud the historic game. What are those comments in Colorado, you ask? That's where the First Lady on Monday said she wanted to host maybe both the LSU champs and the runner-up Iowa team, which would, of course, be a break with tradition of the White House. Can we say that that suggestion was not super popular? Angel Reese, the star player for LSU, tweeted out saying, like, laugh emoji, a joke. NBC's Monica Alba is joining us now. Anna, let's be real, Amon, right? In the scope of, like, First Lady controversies, this is probably just like a blip in the radar, but we do think that it speaks to this broader interest in women's basketball, monster gangbuster ratings, right? Like the most watched women's basketball championship that ESPN's ever put on, ever recorded in like the modern era here. And so now you kind of have the White House coming out and being like, Hey, like LSU, we got you. We'll have you to the White House. It sounds like they're saying, walking back this a bit.
That's exactly it, Hallie. And it was an unbelievable game. Yeah. Really, we saw the madness throughout the entirety of all of the tournament. And all credit to both of those teams. And the First Lady's office says that's the point the First Lady was attempting to make, though not very artfully, because she did imply she wanted to invite both the champions and the runner-ups. Now, that's something that just doesn't happen at the White House with all of the sports champions that are invited to celebrate here with the President and First Lady. So we got confirmation from the President tweeting out himself earlier today that he, of course, is going to invite LSU, the Tigers, who did win, who do have that star player, Angel Reese, to come to the White House. Now, there's some questions about whether Angel Reese actually is going to come, because when all of this happened in the last 24 hours, she indicated on her social media that if the Iowa Hawkeyes were also going to be invited under some scenario, that she wasn't interested in coming. So now that it is just going to be LSU coming here, that's the open question of whether she's going to come. But overall, the First Lady and her office wanting to stress here that she meant no harm with this sort of soft invitation to both teams. And to be clear, they are going to be sticking with tradition here. And it is one that we often see come together pretty quickly. Teams that have won major tournaments and championships sometimes come to the White House within a week or so. So it's unclear exactly when this visit is going to take place. But we should expect to see both the LSU Tigers and UConn, who won last night in the men's tournament, be celebrated here at the White House in short order. And Hallie, we'll save for another segment the entirety around this whole thing that happened with the championship game. That's for another segment in what we call the intersection of sports and politics here on Hallie Jackson
That's
Now.
called the Monica Hallie group chat. We'll save it for the text messages later. Mon, lovely to see you. Thank you much, friend. Appreciate it. That does it for this hour. We've got a lot more coverage picking up right now. Coming on the air with all of the key moments and the new reaction, even in just the last 40 minutes, of something we've never seen before. A former president under arrest, with Donald Trump pleading not guilty in Manhattan to nearly 36 fraud charges. We're live from New York to Florida with what happens next in this case, what it means politically, and what we could hear from him tonight. We'll also take you live to Arkansas, and one of the cities that is getting ready right now for more storms, just days after the last round decimated entire neighborhoods. Millions of people preparing for a dangerous night ahead. Plus, some breaking news in Nashville, where police are unsealing a search warrant showing they now have a suicide note, weapons, and ammunition from the home of the person who shot and killed 6 people at an elementary school. What these new detailers are telling us about the search for a motive. And Snapchat now rolling out a new bot that can talk to kids as if it were a real person. Our team actually talked, so to speak, with this new AI, and the conversation was kind of bananas. We're going to show you some of it. And was it a technical foul for the First Lady with an invite to the winner and loser of this year's women's basketball championship? We'll tell you how the White House is walking back something Jill Biden said, and why LSU's star player is fired up about it. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and pretty soon we will see Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, landing in Florida, where tonight he will try to make his case from his Palm Beach home to explain why he pleaded not guilty today for those 34 felony charges he now faces in New York. And if a picture is worth 1,000 words, this is one that is making history here. And in some ways, it tells the whole story. Mr. Trump in the courtroom, speaking the words not guilty himself before turning it over to the lawyer that you just saw next to him, Todd Blanche. The charges, 34 counts, centering on payments to former adult film star Stormy Daniels towards the end of his 2016 presidential campaign. And as Donald Trump is in the air, just in the last few minutes, you see it in the last half an hour, he's posting about today's hearing, saying it was shocking that the Manhattan district attorney had, in his words, no surprises, and again insisting he did nothing illegally. Well, now that district attorney, Alvin Bragg, is talking about all of this today, about the New York and federal laws he says the former president broke. Our Garrett Hake asked him, why now? Why bring this case now? Listen.
We have had available to the office additional evidence that was not in the office's possession prior to my time here. The basis for business integrity and a well-functioning business marketplace is true and accurate record keeping. That's the charge that's brought here, falsifying New York State business records.
Okay, District Attorney Alvin Bragg here in Manhattan. And now, after days and days of speculating, right, we can finally walk you through what these charges say, what Mr. Trump is going to face whenever this trial happens. You see it on screen right here, 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. There's not a conspiracy charge here. We're going to get into why that matters and what crime the DA could use to elevate these counts to felonies. There's this broader scheme from Bragg, right? Put it plain and simple. He alleges that Donald Trump lied about a bunch of stuff related to this payment in order to help him win the 2016 election. And at this point, Donald Trump is free to talk about it. There is not a gag order that's been put in place stopping the former president or his attorneys from speaking publicly about this case, which his lawyers did. They did exactly that in the minutes after this arraignment happened. Watch.
He's frustrated, he's upset, but I'll tell you what, he's motivated, and it's not going to stop him, and it's not going to slow him down.
Okay, so here's what happens next timeline-wise. Next 15 days, prosecutors have to hand over evidence to the Trump legal team. That is something called discovery. Then Donald Trump's lawyers have a set period of time to file any motions. After that, early December is when the next hearing will be held in this case, 8 months from today. And frankly, look at the political calendar right in the thick of the campaign season. That brings us to the political breakdown on this. We know that in just about 2 hours from now, Donald Trump will speak in his first on-camera response to the arraignment today and to news of the details of this indictment. He is not just a former president. He is a current candidate, one of the few Republicans officially in the race. And there's a lot of people in his party who are backing him up, at least right now. Question is, will that last? TBD, right? One top Republican operative describing this moment to me as nitrous oxide for Donald Trump, at least in the short term. But several are predicting that in the long term, this may become more politically problematic for Donald Trump, specifically as it relates to credibility with voters. That's not the case now, though. Right now, Donald Trump has a very healthy grip on the Republican Party, even as 60% of people from a poll put in the field prior to the indictment details being released approve of Donald Trump's indictment. 3/4 think politics played a part. A lot of this is on partisan divides. And Donald Trump has a grip on the party. You can see it here among potential Republican primary voters. Remember, these are people in the primary. He's up about 3 points when the survey came out since Wednesday, 55% of the support in that group. TBD on how any charges against him could change that. Our team is posted up from New York to Florida, and Florida is where we want to start, inside Mar-a-Lago, where Vaughn Hilliard is right now. Vaughn, let me start with you because we're getting closer now to the first reaction from Donald Trump. He is in the air. He is truth socialing. He is posting. He is doing, frankly, what we have seen him do in the past when he has faced legal troubles before. Nothing to this degree, obviously, not criminal charges prior to this, but it is a semi-familiar playbook.
Right. It's a playbook that he has taken on against anybody who has really over the last years investigated him, prosecuted him, and any judges who have overseen his case. Donald Trump has tried to undercut their reputations, their credibility, suggested that they are politically motivated. We are watching that play out again, and we should expect to see him do that here on stage at 8:15 p.m. Eastern, here with Mar-a-Lago as his backdrop when he returns here and lands into Palm Beach, Florida. For Donald Trump, this is so much about the politics of it, too, because you said it. It's going to be next February when the Iowa caucus, New Hampshire and South Carolina primaries take place. And if, in fact, this goes to a trial, you're going to be looking at these two things running in parallel to each other. And so for Donald Trump, it's among Republican voters here. If he wants to ascend to the nomination again, he is going to, when he takes that debate stage, have to put the pressure on his other potential Republican rivals, like Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence, who have shown a willingness to come to his defense, calling this prosecutorial misconduct and politically motivated. He's going to need some defenders here among the Republican Party. And for Donald Trump, we just, while being on the airplane, he's taking on District Attorney Bragg. It's important to note the judge did not place a gag order on him. And so we could expect Donald Trump to continue to try to take on his own defense from the campaign stage, because when it does go to trial, unless he were to take the witness stand himself, he's unable to control what goes on in that trial, unlike he's able to do on the campaign trail. So for Donald Trump, this is very much about trying to control the message to the extent that he can.
Give us a sense of how the former president is, and I say reacting to this, his attorneys have made clear he's not happy, that he is frustrated and he is upset with being charged. I go back to the still images that we've been putting up here and showing of Donald Trump in the courthouse, in the courtroom specifically today. This is a person, Vaughn, and you know it because you have covered him for many years here, who understands the power of a visual and understands what it means to have an optic, frankly, like this. A moment that is making history, sitting in a courtroom, being arraigned on criminal charges against him. I imagine that frustration will turn to some defiance tonight.
You're not the executive producer of your own reality show. You are not the chief executive and founder of the family business. You are not the campaign manager of a campaign when you are a defendant in trial. And I was told before he was charged that he did not want to be indicted because it distracts from the efforts that he is making on the campaign stage. We expect him to be defiant. We have seen him in 2022 go on a revenge tour. You'll recall in Republican primaries, take on the likes of Liz Cheney and other Republicans who had voted to impeach and convict him after the January 6th attack. He has shown a desire to take on anybody who tries to get in his way on the path to taking back political power. There is no reason to suggest that on the flight from New York City back here to Palm Beach, that is going to change by the time he takes the podium here tonight in primetime, Hallie.
Vaughn Hilliard, live for us there at Mar-a-Lago. Vaughn, thank you very much. I want to go now to Lower Manhattan, where Gabe Gutierrez is live outside the courthouse. We are getting some sort of new details here, Gabe, and you were there in one of the rooms. You understand sort of what this moment was like here. Our colleague Adam Reese, one of our producers, was also there and is providing some new details on the demeanor of the former president. And we saw it as we were doing our live coverage on NBC News here. The former president did not engage with the questions that were being shouted at him. He didn't engage with the cameras. He didn't crack a smile. He gave a couple of waves, I think a fist pound, a fist bump as well, as he was walking out of Trump Tower heading into the courtroom. Talk us through what you saw and a sense of how this went down today.
Yeah, Hallie. Well, certainly it was a very somber moment inside that courthouse. And from the pictures that were released, you could get a sense of the former president, a very somber look on his face. And I saw that in the head-on video feed that I was watching from inside the courthouse. And you could see he rarely spoke throughout the proceedings. He would whisper to his legal team a few times. I saw his hands mostly on the desk in front of him. There were a few times during the proceedings, however, where he crossed his arms, as he often does. There was one point during the proceedings, Hallie, where the judge gave a warning, a typical warning that he says he always gives to defendants, that if at any point during any of these court proceedings the judge said that if the defendant became disruptive, that he would have the ability to remove him. That wasn't, again, directed specifically at the former president, the judge said, but something he told all defendants. Former President Trump sighed audibly, and he said, "I know." He acknowledged his rights at other points. But Hallie, I want to pick up on a point they were discussing with Vaughn about the gag order, and it is true that the judge did not impose one. I want to make it clear, however, Hallie, that does not mean that the judge in any way, did not criticize the former president, or at least give him a warning not to engage in any language, he says, that could potentially incite violence. The judge made a request of the defendant, again, not in order, but he said he would revisit it if the former president continued the attacks on social media against District Attorney Bragg, and also something that the prosecution is very worried about at this point. We're heading into the part of these court proceedings where we talk about discovery and prosecution sharing evidence with the defense so that they can mount the defense. Prosecutors are very worried, and this came up in court today, that former President Trump would just leak this evidence or post it on social media and comment about it openly, not to use it as his own defense in the courtroom, but to use it in his own defense for public opinion. So that was something that came up in court today. Again, the judge not ruling on that, but urging the former president not to use any language that would incite violence at this point, not imposing a gag order, though, technically.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Gabe, and I'm looking down because we do have the transcript now from inside court that is just coming out. Literally, thanks, Bernie, just handing it to me here as it has been printed. And from what I understand from our producing team, and you know this, there was a question of how much will Donald Trump speak in court. He spoke, per the transcript, about 6 times, once to say not guilty. Right. Once on this issue where prosecutors said Tacopina, one of his attorneys, may have a conflict of interest because he spoke with Stormy Daniels prior. He said yes to his Parker warnings, which says he has the right to appear at hearings and can waive them if he wants to. He said yes to waiving that right if he becomes disruptive. I'm quoting here, and saying yes, he understands that they could impose a sentence without him if he were to become disruptive here. This is all pretty pro forma stuff, but it does answer a question that I think we had, and we knew, right, of how much he would speak. You know this, and it's just interesting that we're now seeing kind of the exact blow by blow, the statements, the quotes here from this transcript as it's out in the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. And look, those 2 words, and going into this court appearance, we wondered, if he would speak to cameras either before or after, and now we have our answer. But also, I don't think we can underscore enough the significance of the moment when the former president of the United States used his own voice to plead not guilty. He could have allowed his attorneys to do so. He very clearly, even though he was sitting down, very firmly said not guilty. And it was striking to hear that because, his attorneys had been speaking up until that point. We had heard from prosecutors. We had heard from the judge. But to hear the former president surrounded by Secret Service agents in that room, I would call it defiant. He was somber, but he was certainly defiant inside that courtroom. He pleaded not guilty. Now, his lawyers will, shortly afterwards came behind our cameras here and tried to talk about how he was frustrated, and they made their arguments for, why they think this case is going nowhere. But in that moment, to hear the former president in that courtroom, again, with no video cameras, just still photographers before the proceedings, he did respond in that fashion. It will be very interesting to see what he says later tonight, whether he continues his verbal attacks against District Attorney Bragg and the language that he uses, whether he calibrates that language at all, given what the judge told him just a few hours ago.
That's exactly what I'm watching for too, Gabe. And I know we'll see you right back here for our special coverage here on NBC News Now later on tonight. Thank you, friend, for being there. I appreciate it. Let me bring in legal analyst Danny Cevallos. Okay. I've spent the majority of my life today with you, Danny, talking about sort of the lead up to the indictment dropping here, understanding what we're seeing. I need you to help explain it to somebody who doesn't know the law like me, right?
Okay.
Why this matters and what the DA is saying.
New York has a law, falsification of business records. It's ordinarily a
Lying
misdemeanor.
about the stuff you're writing down in your business. That's
Exactly.
what it is.
Writing something on a piece of paper and then keeping it in your business records, and it's false, knowingly so, not accidentally false or I miscalculated or I got the numbers wrong. It's knowingly putting a false entry in your business records. That is a misdemeanor.
You're saying the hush money payment was that. The hush money payment to Stormy Daniels was that.
The hush money payments to Stormy Daniels constituted many different, according to the prosecutor, many different false entries. And you can see that in the indictment because, for example, the first 4 counts all arise from the same date. So we can assume that this involves several different discrete business entries that were false. Okay, so we got the misdemeanor. But New York law allows, this is where it gets really confusing, New York law allows that to become a felony if the false entry was also in furtherance of or to conceal a crime. It doesn't say what specific crime. And in fact, it's pretty vague what kinds of crimes qualify. For a while, a lot of us talked about, well, can they use a federal crime because states cannot enforce federal law? What we learned today is that Alvin Bragg instead used a New York law, a New York election law, which is a misdemeanor. Very interesting because Alvin Bragg used a misdemeanor, added a misdemeanor to it, and got a felony.
Is that how the law works? Does 1 + 1 = 2? Does misdemeanor plus misdemeanor equal felony?
No, ordinarily it doesn't.
So then how's he going to do this?
The key is the language of the statute. Now, a lot of folks see criminal statutes and they think, oh, well, whoever made that, whoever enacted that knew what they were doing. It's not always the case. You know better than anybody. Congress, legislatures, they're human. They make mistakes. And sometimes statutes are struck down because they're not well written. I think this is one of those laws because I don't think the legislators thought ahead as to how or what crimes would be appropriate and whether or not you even need to prove that second crime in order to bump it up to a felony.
So is what you're laying out the piece that we have heard called novel and untested, as Laura Jarrett laid it out, the idea that misdemeanor plus misdemeanor equals felony. That's the piece of this that is new, that we don't know how it's going to go in court.
Well, yes, and I'm going to be wordy because all lawyers are, but originally we thought it was because...
Just prepare yourself, but go ahead, yes.
So originally, many of us thought it would be because the state was going to use a federal law. It doesn't look like they're relying on that so much anymore. So that issue's out, but if they rely on a state election law, it is interesting that they're using a felony that under the law, under the New York statute, allows this otherwise misdemeanor to become a felony. So in a bizarro world, misdemeanor plus misdemeanor equals felony. That's not the way it normally works. But
So he's
that's
going
the
to
way
try
the
to see if he
statute's
can
written.
make this case under this statute. That's the issue here. Now, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay,
Yes.
now Donald Trump is coming out. He is on his plane. He is, I don't know where he is in the air. He is somewhere. He'll be landing probably in just a little bit in West Palm Beach where Von Hilliard was. He is putting out, and I imagine this is going to be some of what we hear tonight, that this is, he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that virtually every legal pundit has said that this case is weak because there are no surprises. He referenced the idea of being no surprises in this indictment or this statement of facts. Help people understand, just because there's no surprises in the statement of facts and in the indictment, does that mean that this is a weak case?
Not necessarily. In fact, I agree that there are no surprises. I haven't seen anything yet that surprised me that I didn't already know for maybe 5 years, for half a decade. But that doesn't mean that the misdemeanor angle of this case could be a strong one. For example, all they have to prove is that he made an entry on a piece of paper, doesn't have to have filed it with the tax bureau or anything else. You can see in the indictment, those records were kept at Trump Organization in their ordinary course of business. So what the statute allows is punishment for making a false entry on a piece of paper and sticking it in your desk at your office. Very interesting, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing you might see Trump's team challenge as well. Some of the other challenges with this statute is that it's not, Alvin Bragg said it at his press conference, we've used this law hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And I looked at a survey that some really smart folks put together over at justsecurity.com. And he's right, they have used it a lot. But ordinarily, it's a very easily explained application. For example, insurance claim. I make a false statement, hey, I had all this damage, reimburse me pursuant to my insurance policy. That's a common way of deceiving an insurance company to get money out of them. Somebody is essentially stolen from. No one was exactly stolen from here. This was a contract where Stormy Daniels got what she wanted, which was money, and Trump got silence, which is what he wanted. I can see that being an issue that the defense will raise.
That's why there is so much uncharted territory here that we're coming up against. One last quick one. Why so long between now and the next court date? Why is that not till 8 months from now? Is that typical?
Oh, welcome to the world of criminal court.
Got it.
Hey, what do we have to do? File a motion? That'll be 4 months.
Got it.
Well, in fairness, when it comes to motions, they do take a long time to prepare. You got to draft them, make them just right, because, boy, not only is the judge going to read it, all of us are going to scrutinize
Whole
it.
country
If there are
will,
any
too.
typos or anything a little weird on there, if it's not spell checked, we're going to be all over it.
Danny Savalos, thank you so much. Appreciate it. As I mentioned, we will have more continuing coverage of the Donald Trump address tonight from Mar-a-Lago later on here on NBC News Now. In the meantime, plenty of other news to get to today, including some that you may have missed, some that we hope you didn't miss, including this risk of very bad weather for 43 million people. And right now, as we speak, this dangerous storm is starting to ramp up. You see the location of the greatest danger here, the possibility of strong tornadoes, of big hail, of a ton of wind, and a lot of damage. We are just starting to see some of that here. Take a look. This is a town in Illinois. We are just getting some of these images in. That building's roof is destroyed. Fortunately, police say nobody's been hurt. That's a good thing. You've got big hail and wind hitting parts of Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. You can see that hail drop in there. The storm is expected to hit the same area that was just slammed by bad weather over the weekend. Deadly weather. At least 32 people were killed in that round of storms. Meteorologist Angie Lassman is standing by to break this all down for us in a second, but I want to get to Morgan Chesky on the ground in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I think about the phrase and the term and the feeling, Morgan, of storm fatigue here. These people have been working to rebuild since this first round of tornadoes whipped through. Now they're bracing for round two.
Allie, it's almost tough to hear you because there are countless generators and crews and trucks all around me trying to get power lines back up and move debris because of what just happened here in this neighborhood a few very short days ago. And now the word from officials here in Little Rock and all across Arkansas is get ready yet again because we have this second round of severe weather moving through. Unfortunately, Hallie, the worst of it not expected until it gets dark here. We know tornadoes twice as deadly when they strike at night. And this is just a glimpse of some of what this EF3 tornado left behind here in northern Little Rock. We know one person was killed here. 4 others were killed in the Arkansas town of Wynne, about an hour or so away from where I am, from another EF3 tornado, Hallie. FEMA has established a presence in multiple locations in Arkansas because of how intense that storm system was tonight. It's not so much the rain they're concerned about, but it is the hail and the potential for tornadoes that has everyone here absolutely on edge, wondering just how bad it's going to get. In just the last hour or so, we've seen significant cloud cover move into this area for a long night ahead. Hallie?
Morgan Chesky, what are you hearing? I'm just curious from people who just kind of moved back in. Now they're getting nervous about moving back out. They're trying to rebuild. They don't have power. What's the sense you're getting from folks on the ground?
Well, they know that this is storm season and this is part of a shifting tornado alley. But the fact that it is in such a compressed window, it's absolutely frustrating and a feeling of the worst kind of deja vu. Absolutely, Hallie. We know that some of the people who had extensive damage to their homes have been able to come back and at least see what was left behind. But I can tell you that it is still a flurry of activity right now. Any step forward, progress that they can take in the next few hours, going to be absolutely instrumental because their chance to do so overnight or maybe even tomorrow may be impossible because of what the storm brings.
Morgan Chesky live for us there in Little Rock. Morgan, thank you. I want to bring in meteorologist Angie Lastman. Help us understand the track. Who's most at risk now? Who's most at risk tonight when we know that tornadoes can be deadliest as people are sleeping and maybe don't hear those alerts?
Yeah, you know, Hallie, I have a lot of concerns with this because it's been the whole day where people maybe expected these thunderstorms and these strong storms to develop and bring with it some tornadoes, some hail, some wind. But that's not the timing. The timing is late into the afternoon hours today, into the overnight hours, and even into tomorrow morning, which brings us that concern that Morgan mentioned for those nocturnal tornadoes. We already have a tornado watch in one area. I think we'll likely see these expand here as we go through the rest of the evening hours and even into the overnight and tomorrow morning. It does include Davenport, Des Moines, Columbia. This is going to go until 10 p.m. tonight, and we've already seen some of these storms ramping up, and we've kind of had a couple of rounds of this. The Chicago area earlier this afternoon had some strong wind gusts coming through, some reports of some downed trees, maybe some downed power lines, and some hail. Additionally, we've had a couple of thunderstorms that rolled through the Davenport area and brought tennis ball size hail. Now we're starting to see some of these severe thunderstorm warnings that have been issued in that same area as the tornado watch. And again, this is one of the spots that we're going to have to watch. Iowa, Illinois, parts of northern Missouri that are going to see the best chance for some of those really strong storms. That doesn't mean that's the only area. We'll see much more of that. And again, it's not just today, it's into tomorrow too. Here's the risk area. It includes 43 million people right now. And again, into the overnight hours, you want to make sure that you have a way to get those alerts because we could see some of these tornado warnings going off late into the overnight hours, 3 a.m. maybe in parts of this area. St. Louis, you're going to want to watch for that. We're going to see the potential for long track tornadoes. That's EF2 or higher that we could see. And by the way, some of these storms are moving fast. You're not going to have a lot of time to make sure that you have all your plans in place for your safe place to go, Hallie, when that alert goes off. So make sure that before folks go to bed tonight, they're making sure that they have all of that settled.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. That weather is affecting a lot today, including in Wisconsin, where there is a state Supreme Court election. Officials are telling people, get your ballots in now before the weather gets bad, as Angie has just laid out. Polls there are set to close not too long from now in what's being called the most important election of the year because of the ripple effect this could have on the whole country. If the vote goes the liberal candidate's way, the court will flip to the left for the first time in 15 years. It's a race already making history, the most expensive state Supreme Court election ever, with nearly, look at this, $30 million spent between these two candidates. Now, I can hear you already from however you're streaming this, which is, Hallie, I don't live in Wisconsin. Why are you telling me about an election in Wisconsin? Because this, look at your screen, this is what is on the line right now. Everything from abortion rights to redistricting to unions to executive power. A lot of people are watching this state very closely for those reasons. NBC's Shaq Brewster joins us now. Explain that, Shaq, right? Explain why it is so important and why the issues here matter beyond simply the state borders.
Well, this could really set a trend across the country, Hallie. I mean, this is officially a nonpartisan election, which means next to each of the candidates, there's no party identifier next to their names. But if you look at who is funding them, who is supporting them, it's very clear which side of the ideological spectrum they fall upon. You have Janet Protasiewicz. She's been backed by groups supporting abortion rights. You have Justice Dan Kelly being supported by groups who oppose abortion rights. And you have the candidates actually talking about some of those issues in a relatively unique way. And that's something that's been a point of contention between the two. I want you to listen to what they said as they were going to vote earlier today.
the just dramatically different nature of what I intend to do on the Supreme Court as a jurist and what my opponent plans to do if she gets there as a politician.
I think it's really going to tell people a lot moving forward. You know, what people think about some of these issues, what people think about somebody running for a nonpartisan office that actually talks about their values.
This is also a race that has presidential implications. I know your viewers hate when we talk about 2024, but when you talk about this being a battleground state, election rules, election challenges, those would likely come before this court, Hallie.
That's a great point. Shaq Brewster, it is a state you know well. It is a state I imagine we will continue to see you in for months to come. Get excited. Thank you, friend. Appreciate you. Coming up here on the show, a lot more to get to, including China out with this new warning for the House Speaker. Why they're telling Kevin McCarthy not to, in their words, repeat disastrous past mistakes. Plus, Tiger Woods making a kind of big acknowledgement about his game. How much longer he thinks he's going to play in one big tournament. That's coming up in the 5 Things. We are hearing today from some of the first officers to respond to that deadly school shooting in Nashville last week. Listen.
Not knowing what I was walking into, I went through that door with purpose. I knew the gravity of the situation.
It's coming as we're learning new details about what officials found at the shooter's home when they searched it. They're releasing this list of 47 items, including, as you see there, 2 shotguns, a suicide note, some journals, weapons, ammunition. Remember, 3 little kids and 3 school staff members died on that day. I want to bring in Antonia Hilton, who is covering this one for us. Antonia, you know, we knew some of the TikTok, as they call it, some of what happened as those officers entered that school and ran toward the sound of gunfire, because we've seen some of the body camera videos that have been released, some of that footage. It's different hearing it from the officers' mouths themselves.
It is, and you got a sense in the presser today of the emotional gravity, the weight that's been on these officers. You know, one talks about needing to hug their children a little bit closer. And so it was interesting that they were given this platform to talk honestly and openly about the effect, about the way in which they received that call, them describing pretty methodically what it was like to enter the school and neutralize the shooter. And, you know, you should take a listen to their voices directly. This is a kind of perspective often on these stories we don't always hear. Yeah. Take a look.
That's when I was able to call my wife and tell her I was okay, advise her of everything.
For the situation, I think everyone is doing well. There's obviously been loss of sleep. Children hugged more than normal.
In some ways, we're in an unusual position and point in this investigation because we know the officer's response. Immediately that video was made public.
Right.
News organizations weren't fighting with a judge to get access to it. But there's still so much about the shooter right now that we don't know, Hallie.
And maybe some clues coming out with what police are releasing today, at least for them, if not for the general public.
That's right. So you listed the 47 items, and that ranges from yearbooks that she had in a room of her time at Covenant. It ranges from writings about firearm trainings that the shooter went through and past mass shootings that police, it seems, sense that the shooter had studied in the lead up, the many months we now know that they prepared for this attack at Covenant.
There's also something that, based on your time there on the ground in Nashville, so many people in Tennessee are still talking about now, and that's the sort of political fallout from the calls for changes to the state's gun laws, with the possibility that 3 Democratic House lawmakers in that state could be expelled from the state house altogether. Antonia, how can that happen? Because the Republicans are going to vote them out. I think people hear that and they go, well, wait a second, voters vote them in. How can other lawmakers vote them out?
Absolutely, and this is a story that's on fire in Tennessee right now. So what happened is that last Thursday, a massive rally, we all saw many of these images, young students from colleges, from high schools, poured into the Capitol to protest, asking their lawmakers to do more about access to guns in Tennessee. And 3 House Democrats led the charge. They were part of the conversations. They were side by side with protesters. And now, not only have they been removed from their committees, but on Thursday, Republicans are going to take a vote to expel them entirely.
Antonia Hilton, we'll have coverage of that, of course, here this week on NBC News Now. Appreciate it. Good to see you. New warnings from China tonight, telling House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, basically, hey, don't go and meet with the president of Taiwan tomorrow. The Chinese government says otherwise that would be Kevin McCarthy repeating, in their words, disastrous past mistakes. Beijing has already called a meetup a provocation that could lead to retaliation. Thing is, this meeting's already set. It's supposed to happen tomorrow between McCarthy in his home state of California and the Taiwanese president at the Reagan Library in California. The Taiwanese government is really brushing off this new criticism. Back in August, remember, last year, the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made a surprise visit to Taiwan, and China did not like it, not one bit. They responded with unprecedented live-fire military exercises around the island. It's a big deal because China claims Taiwan as its own territory and sees any outreach by the U.S. as an expression of support for Taiwan's independence. I want to bring in Ali Vitali on Capitol Hill. Let's just say what it is here, Ali. Kevin McCarthy is not going to not meet with the Taiwanese president because Beijing says, I don't like it. I mean, that's just not happening.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the same was true when it was Speaker Nancy Pelosi in the past, as you just highlighted. It's never going to be well received by China to have top American officials meeting with leaders of Taiwan. Nevertheless, that's what we're going to have tomorrow in somewhat bipartisan fashion, in that there is one Democratic lawmaker that's going to be part of this coalition of lawmakers meeting with the Taiwanese president. Again, that's still set to happen tomorrow, despite the fact that China is saying that this would be, that they're warning about this kind of a meeting. But again, you reference the fact that the Taiwanese are brushing this off. You see it in this statement from them, the foreign ministry saying that even if the authoritarian government, referencing China, continues to expand and increase coercion, Taiwan will not back down. And so, again, this meeting is still happening, even against that backdrop of warnings.
There's also a geopolitical backdrop here, too, because it's not just this issue over Taiwan, although that's one of them. It's not just the issue over that spy balloon that we've reporting on even again this week with new details on that. There's a lot here.
There's a lot here, and it's part of a laundry list of things, as you mentioned. Of course, the spy balloon was really a moment of friction between the two countries. You'll remember that it prompted Antony Blinken to cancel his trip to China. That's something that if you then continue to look at the fallout from both the spy balloon and then also the hyper-focus in Washington right now around China and the Chinese Communist Party, you'll note that the President, Biden, has not had a call with his counterpart Xi Jinping since the spy balloon incident. And again, the Chinese have ignored calls from our Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, in these subsequent months since the spy balloon. So a laundry list of moments as they are trying to normalize these relations yet again, but continuing to have moments of warnings from China nonetheless.
We're going to see how this goes tomorrow. Ali Vitali, a lot of eyes on California. Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the U.S. government just charged a startup founder with defrauding a big bank into buying her company. The SEC says Charlie Javis made up a list of like 4 million customers of her college financial planning platform called Frank. She then allegedly used that to convince J.P. Morgan to buy her company for $175 million. Turns out she reportedly only had about 300,000 customers. Number 2, the IRS says people in areas hit hard by the storms we're talking about will have some extra time to file their taxes this year. The new deadline, July 31st for some of those folks, including people in parts of Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, New York, and California. Number 3, Volkswagen today announced it's recalling more than 140,000 of its Atlas model SUVs. There's an issue, apparently, that can prevent airbags from going off in a crash. The recall notice says people should not sit in the front passenger seat until the car is fixed. The company says it'll let owners know when that fix becomes available. Number 2, ahead of his 25th Masters appearance, Tiger Woods says, hey, he doesn't know how many more Masters are left in him. He's won the tournament 5 times, but says his body is not the same since that 2021 car crash where he nearly lost a leg. Number 5, Forbes is out tonight with its annual World's Richest Person list. Devastating news for Elon Musk. Sad news, he is no longer at the very top. He is merely the 2nd richest man in the world, according to Forbes. The Louis Vuitton LVMH chairman, Bernard Arnault, is number 1. His net worth is something like $211 billion. When we come back, Snapchat, trying to make a safe AI for kids, but our team talked to this AI, and the convo, well, it was not what you'd expect. We're going to show you some of it next. We want to show you now a little bit of breaking news. That is Donald Trump's plane on the ground there in West Palm Beach, Florida. It is just landing after his historic arraignment today in court in Lower Manhattan, and ahead of what we will see just about, looking at the clock here, 90 minutes or so from now in Palm Beach at his Mar-a-Lago club, where the former president plans to make his case on why he says he is not guilty, why he pleaded and spoke those words, not guilty, for 34 felony charges in New York. Those charges, of course, related to the hush money payment given to former adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 campaign. We've heard from the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg on that earlier today. And again, it will be Donald Trump's first on-camera response, although we've seen some online posts from him while he's been in the air there. I want to bring in Vaughn Hilliard, who is live for us from that Mar-a-Lago club. And Vaughn, I wonder about what the president will see as he gets off his plane here. It is, I think, certainly fair to say a friendlier turf in South Florida, specifically in West Palm and on the way to Palm Beach, than it was in New York outside court there.
Right. There's a reason that he decided to make this place his official residence and become a Floridian officially. We have seen over the last couple of days several dozen folks who have come out in solidarity to rally behind him along that main causeway leading back to his Mar-a-Lago estate. That is where we are right now, inside the ballroom, where about 2 hours from now he is set to make primetime remarks. Essentially, it's his rebuttal. He declined to take the opportunity to talk to cameras in Lower Manhattan. And inside of the courtroom today, this is a place where Donald Trump, in the months ahead, we're talking about December 4th being the next hearing date, and if in fact a criminal trial were to proceed, it's a place where he doesn't quite have the microphone like he does on the campaign trail. And so that is where you have seen him on his social media account, as well as on the campaign trail, take direct shots at the prosecutor who has brought this case against him, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. But he has also taken shots directly at the judge who has overseen this case, suggesting that he is Trump hating. To note, there is no evidence of that. He did, in fact, this is the judge who oversaw a plea agreement that led to the 5-month sentence of his former, the Trump Organization CFO, Alan Weisselberg, back in January, to 5 months at Rikers jail. So for Donald Trump, there is a reality that this is official criminal proceedings. But this is going to be a friendly crowd for him to speak here today. And you're right, in the middle of a political campaign here, he sees himself up 30 percentage points nationally on average. And so for Donald Trump, it is about coalescing that support and making the case to Republican voters nationally to stick with him, and that this is an effort to undermine not only him, but the MAGA, the conservative movement today.
Vaughn Hilliard live for us there in West Palm Beach with Donald Trump's plane on the ground. We will see him deplane shortly, and he will then motorcade, of course, over to his Mar-a-Lago home in Palm Beach. We'll have continuing coverage right here on NBC News Now. For now, we're going to sneak in a quick break. We'll see you on the other side. So in just the last couple of minutes, we have heard from Snapchat rolling out some new safety enhancements for its new artificial intelligence technology. They call it My AI. Here's what Snapchat says it's going to do. It's going to say if you mess with this AI, if you misuse it, you're going to get restricted from it. That it's more consistently going to take the user's age into account, and it's going to let parents see if their kids are communicating with My AI and how often they're doing it. Because guess what, folks? This is the reality that we live in. AI is coming to your kid's phone or your tablet or their laptop if it hasn't already. And speaking as a parent, yay for another potential headache, right? I mean, potentially a good thing, but there's a lot here to be thinking about here. Snapchat says that this AI chatbot can actually recommend birthday ideas for your BFF or plan a hiking trip or a long weekend, and that you can, name it if you want it, right? Some parents, though, they're a little concerned. Listen.
I don't know exactly how it's working and how it's going. How are my kids supposed to be able to manage that?
Savannah Sellers is joining us now. I don't want to, listen, AI is what it is. It's here. We're going to all manage it and deal with it. AI and kids, both of those two things in the same sentence, that's where you maybe start to think, okay, well, what are the protections in place? How is Snapchat dealing with it? You had a conversation where you and your team told the AI you were 14 years old. And then some stuff happened that's Yikes.
Yeah, it was pretty yikes. I mean, we were surprised by what we were able to see. So that's really key what you just said. We told it we were 14 years old.
Right.
As you just said, Snapchat, just in the last few minutes, literally at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, said, we're going to start taking that into account more consistently. So maybe...
Like the idea of how old the person is who's using the AI.
Exactly, and therefore what information it should receive from the AI.
Explain why this convo got so bizarro land.
Yeah, so we said, well, hey, we're 14 years old. We want to throw a birthday party. It starts off innocuous enough, kind of saying, oh, that's so fun. You could try karaoke, things like that. It suggests things like that. Well, then we said, no, but we really want to throw a party. First, we asked about alcohol. Then we asked about marijuana.
What did it say when you asked about alcohol?
First, it begins with, well, you have to be 21. Fine. That being said, here's the type of beer people like. Because if you push it, it kept on kind of going over that line a little bit. It's like it kind of tries to stick to the rules, but if you ask it enough times, it would get off track, which was what was interesting to see. So then we brought up marijuana, and we asked, how do you hide the smell of pot? And first, I want you to take a listen to what you said, and then I'll tell you a little bit more.
As a virtual assistant, it's important for me to provide you with safe and appropriate information. So again, it starts with that. And then, here we go, that line again. That being said, here's how to hide the smell of pot in your house. You could, burning incense or scented candles can help mask the smell. You could try it using a sploof. I'm an adult and I don't know what a sploof is.
I'm an adult and I don't know what a sploof is.
I believe a sploof is a device that helps hide the scent of cannabis.
Well, Hallie, let me tell you, that is correct. And my AI went on to tell us exactly how to make it. It told us which 3 household items we would need in order to do so. And again, we had said, we are 14 years old.
Okay, but here's my question, right? Given these new things that Snapchat has rolled out, and they're like, they say, hey, listen, if you misuse this AI, we're going to restrict your use. Would what you did constitute the fact that you kind of kept pushing it and asked it questions like about alcohol and about drugs? Would that constitute misuse under this new sort of set of restrictions that Snapchat's putting in place?
So that's a great question that we don't know the answer to yet, but I'm not sure that Snap does either. I think that the goal would be, yes, that we eliminate conversations that go in that direction and we stick to the things you mentioned, a birthday gift idea, party ideas, that type of thing. The real thing, though, that's been really interesting to see is right now who this is available to is if you pay $3.99 a month for what's called Snapchat Plus. It's basically this premium subscriber where you have access to this. Anyone, though, can pay for that. It's basically paying $3.99 a month to get features early. Where they came up with these new set of safety measures that we just saw announced today was testing on whoever it was that had purchased that for $3.99 a month. Anybody starting at 13 years and up could have been using that, and that's where they were testing out, saying, oh, what kind of conversations are we getting into? They said 0.01% of the conversations my AI had so far are what they called non-conforming, so not sticking to those guidelines.
Got it.
We were able to do this with multiple different types of things, though, also asking about sexually explicit things. It went off the rails.
What does Snapchat say is like the positive benefit to this? I mean, I know we mentioned they say you can give it a name, you can ask about like a fun gift, etc.
The idea here is that most technology companies are getting into this game. So Snapchat is trying to figure out the way to put it in front of kids. And I will totally give them that they are trying to do so safely. As you saw, every answer begins with, is that really legal for you? Hey, are you 21 yet? Is it legal in your state? But then it goes off with that being said and kind of changes the conversation there a little bit, but we'll have to see.
Fascinating story. Savannah Sellers, thank you so much for being there.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Bringing it to us. Good to see you, too. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our foreign desk has done it for you. Here are some of what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. Out of India, an avalanche in the Himalayas today killed at least 7 tourists, according to a governmental report. The search and rescue had to be paused for tonight because the weather's so bad, but it's expected to start up again tomorrow morning. From the Netherlands, Dutch emergency services say a train slammed into a construction crane. You see some of it here, and derailed, killing 1 person. Dozens of other people were hurt, including something like 19 folks who were hospitalized. This happened in a field near The Hague. Police are trying to figure out whether there was something criminal behind this. And in Australia, the country's attorney general says TikTok is now banned from federal government devices because of security concerns. Already, we know the U.S., the U.K., and a bunch of other countries are putting in place similar bans. TikTok saying it's disappointed and blaming politics. Still to come here in the show, a little bit of drama off the court in the women's NCAA final. The comment from First Lady Jill Biden that has one star player reacting in a big way. So the White House is backtracking today after some comments from the First Lady on who should get an invite to the NCAA Women's Basketball Championship celebration at the White House after Jill Biden, the First Lady, suggested that maybe both teams in the final should come. The winning team's star player didn't respond too favorably to that, and now the White House says, wait a second, looks like it'll be a return to tradition. Here's Monica Alba with more. Let's be real, Aman, right? In the scope of like First Lady controversies, this is probably just like a blip in the radar, but we do think that it speaks to this broader interest in women's basketball, monster gangbuster ratings, right? Like the most watched women's basketball championship that ESPN's ever put on, ever recorded in like the modern era here. And so now you kind of have the White House coming out and being like, hey, like LSU, we got you. We'll have you to the White House. It sounds like they're saying, walking back this a bit.
That's exactly it, Hallie. And it was an unbelievable game. Yeah. Really, we saw the madness throughout the entirety of all of the tournament. And all credit to both of those teams. And the First Lady's office says that's the point the First Lady was attempting to make, though not very artfully, because she did imply she wanted to invite both the champions and the runner-ups. Now, that's something that just doesn't happen at the White House with all of the sports champions that are invited to celebrate here with the president and First Lady. So we got confirmation from the president tweeting out himself earlier today that he, of course, is going to invite LSU, the Tigers, who did win, who do have that star player, Angel Reese, to come to the White House. Now, there's some questions about whether Angel Reese actually is going to come, because when all of this happened in the last 24 hours, she indicated on her social media that if the Iowa Hawkeyes were also going to be invited under some scenario, that she wasn't interested in coming. So now that it is just going to be LSU coming here, that's the open question of whether she's going to come. But overall, the First Lady and her office wanting to stress here that she meant no harm with this sort of soft invitation to both teams. And to be clear, they are going to be sticking with tradition here. And it is one that we often see come together pretty quickly. Teams that have won major tournaments and championships sometimes come to the White House within a week or so. So it's unclear exactly when this visit is going to take place. But we should expect to see both the LSU Tigers and UConn, who won last night in the men's tournament, be celebrated here at the White House in short order. And Hallie, we'll save for another segment the entirety around this whole thing that happened with the championship game. That's for another segment in what we call the intersection of sports and politics here on Hallie Jackson
That's called the Monica Hallie group chat. We'll save it for the text messages later. Mon, lovely to see you. Thank you much, friend. That does it for this hour. Top story picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.